Unexpected encounter. The neon-lit corridors of Outpost Zeta 9 hummed with the usual cacophony of a frontier space station. Beings from 100 different worlds jostled through the crowded passageways, their languages blending into a discordant symphony of alien tongues. Amidst this chaos, a towering figure moved with purposeful grace, parting the crowd like a plasma cutter through hull plating. Zaxtor, the Kragarian mercenary, cut an imposing figure even by the standards of his warrior race. His leathery gray skin bore the scars of countless battles, each one a testament to his skill and survival. The worn armor encasing his massive frame spoke of a lifetime spent fighting other people's wars for credits. As he navigated the winding corridors, Zaxtor's 4 eyes scanned his surroundings with practiced wariness. Outpost Zeta 9 wasn't known for its hospitality, especially to his kind. The station hung in the void between 3 disputed star systems, a haven for smugglers, fugitives, and anyone else looking to disappear. Zaxtor was here for a job, or at least that's what he told himself. The truth was more complicated. A nagging feeling had drawn him to this backwater station, a half-remembered dream that refused to fade. He'd learned long ago to trust his instincts, even when they made no sense. As he rounded a corner into the bustling market district, something caught his eye. Among the sea of aliens and off-worlders, a small figure stood out. An elderly human woman, her silver hair tied back in a neat bun, carefully examining the wares at a produce stall. Zaxtor froze, his heart hammering in his chest. It couldn't be her. Not after all these years, not in a place like this. And yet, the memories came flooding back, unbidden and overwhelming. 15 cycles ago, on a nameless moon in the Outer Rim, the young Kragarian soldier lay broken and bleeding in the mud, his armor shattered, his weapon lost. The battle had been swift and brutal, his unit overwhelmed by the insurgents they'd been sent to pacify. As consciousness faded, Zaxtor prepared himself for the void that awaited all warriors. But death did not come. Instead, a face swam into focus above him, a human face, lined with age and worry. Soft hands gently probed his wounds, and a soothing voice spoke words he couldn't understand. "Easy there, big fella. You're in rough shape, but we'll get you patched up." Zaxtor tried to speak, to warn the human that helping him was dangerous. The insurgents would kill anyone who aided the Kragarian forces. But his body refused to respond, and darkness claimed him once more. When he awoke, he found himself in a small, dimly lit room. The pain had dulled to a persistent ache, and clean bandages wrapped his wounds. The human woman sat nearby, her kind eyes watching him with concern. "Welcome back," she said softly. "I was starting to worry you wouldn't pull through." Zaxtor struggled to sit up, his translator finally kicking in. "Why?" he croaked, his voice raw. "Why help me?" The woman smiled, the wrinkles around her eyes deepening. "Because you needed it. That's reason enough." Over the next few days, as Zaxtor regained his strength, he learned more about his savior. Margaret was her name, and she was part of a relief mission that had been caught in the crossfire of the war. Despite the danger, she refused to abandon those who needed her help, even if they were the very soldiers responsible for the conflict. When Zaxtor was well enough to leave, Margaret simply wished him well and asked for nothing in return. Her selfless act of kindness shook the young Kragarian to his core, challenging everything he'd been taught about humans and warfare. Now, 15 cycles later, Zaxtor stood frozen in the crowded market of Outpost Zeta 9, staring at a woman who couldn't possibly be here. And yet, as she turned, he caught a glimpse of her profile. The same gentle curve of her nose, the same determined set of her jaw. Before he could stop himself, Zaxtor found his feet carrying him toward her. The crowd parted instinctively before his massive frame, and in moments he loomed over the petite human woman. "Margaret," he rumbled, his gravelly voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked up, startled. For a moment, confusion clouded her features. Then her eyes widened in recognition. a mix of shock and joy spreading across her face. "Well, I'll be," she breathed. "Is that really you, Zaxtor?" The Kregarian nodded, feeling suddenly awkward. He towered over Margaret, his battle-scarred form a stark contrast to her fragile appearance. Yet in that moment, he felt like that young, vulnerable soldier once more. "I did not expect to find you here," Zaxtor managed, acutely aware of the curious stares from nearby market-goers. Margaret chuckled, the sound warm and familiar. "I could say the same about you, young man. Last I saw, you were headed back to your people. How'd you end up in this den of thieves and scoundrels?" Zaxtor shifted uncomfortably. How could he explain the path that had led him here? The disillusionment with his people's endless wars, the years spent as a hired gun, the gnawing emptiness that no amount of credits could fill. "It is a long story," he said finally. Margaret's expression softened. "Well then, why don't we find somewhere a bit quieter to catch up? I know a little cafe not far from here that serves a decent cup of tea. That is, if you don't mind being seen with an old woman." Despite himself, Zaxtor felt the corners of his mouth twitch upward, the closest thing to a smile his species could manage. "I would like that," he rumbled. As they made their way through the crowded market, Zaxtor couldn't shake the feeling that something momentous was about to happen. The universe had brought them together again for a reason, and he sensed that both their lives were about to change dramatically. What he didn't realize was just how right he was, or how dangerous the coming days would prove to be. The cafe Margaret led him to was tucked away in a quieter section of the station, its windows offering a breathtaking view of the starfield beyond. As they settled into a booth designed to accommodate beings of various sizes, Zaxtor couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns his life had taken. "So," Margaret said, after ordering tea for herself and a Kregarian energy drink for Zaxtor, "what brings a big, tough mercenary like yourself to a place like this?" Zaxtor hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "I am not certain," he admitted. "I felt drawn here, though I cannot explain why." Margaret's eyes twinkled with a knowing look. "Ah, following your instincts. That's a very human trait, you know." Before Zaxtor could respond, their drinks arrived. He watched in fascination as Margaret carefully stirred sugar into her tea, the ritual somehow both alien and comfortingly familiar. "And you, Margaret?" he asked. "How did you come to be here, so far from your homeworld?" A shadow passed over the old woman's face, there and gone in an instant. "Oh, you know how it is. The galaxy's a big place, and there's always someone who needs help. I go where I'm needed." Zaxtor nodded, sensing there was more to the story but respecting her privacy. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. "I never properly thanked you," Zaxtor said suddenly, his voice low, "for saving my life all those cycles ago. It changed me." Margaret reached out, patting his massive hand with her small, wrinkled one. "You don't need to thank me, Zaxtor. Seeing you here, alive and well, that's thanks enough." As they continued to talk, catching up on the years that had passed, neither of them noticed the hooded figure watching them from across the cafe. Nor did they see the figure discreetly activate a communicator, speaking in hushed tones. "Target confirmed. The human is with him, awaiting further instructions." The pieces were set. The game was about to begin, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Revelations and danger. The gentle hum of the station's life support systems provided a soothing backdrop to Zaxtor and Margaret's conversation. As they reminisced about their brief but impactful encounter years ago, Zaxtor found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. There was something about Margaret's presence that put him at ease, despite the ingrained wariness that had kept him alive all these years. "So you left the military," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "What made you decide to become a mercenary?" Zaxtor's four eyes blinked in rapid succession, a sign of discomfort in his species. After what happened on that moon, things changed. I began to question our wars, our motives. When my tour ended, I couldn't bring myself to re-enlist. Margaret nodded sympathetically. And mercenary work. It was familiar, Zaxtor rumbled. Fighting is what I know. But as a mercenary, I choose my battles. I can walk away from conflicts I don't believe in. As Margaret opened her mouth to respond, a sudden commotion from the cafe's entrance caught their attention. 3 beings burst in, their features hidden beneath hooded cloaks. But Zaxtor's keen eyes caught the telltale shimmer of active camouflage beneath the fabric. Shreltak assassins, he growled, every muscle in his massive frame tensing for combat. Margaret's eyes widened, but to Zaxtor's surprise, she showed no signs of panic. Instead, her expression hardened into one of grim determination. "Friends of yours?" she asked dryly. "Not likely," Zaxtor replied, his hand inching toward the concealed blaster at his hip. "Shreltak only take contracts on high-value targets. Someone wants me dead. Badly." The assassins spread out, their movements fluid and predatory. Other patrons in the cafe began to notice the tension, some quietly slipping out while others watched with morbid curiosity. "We need to move," Zaxtor said, his voice low and urgent. "There's a back exit. If we're quick, we might." But before he could finish, Margaret did something that left the battle-hardened mercenary stunned. She stood up, smoothed out her simple dress, and strode purposefully toward the assassins. "Now, gentlemen," she called out, her voice carrying an authority that belied her fragile appearance. "I'm sure we can resolve this without any unpleasantness." The assassins hesitated, clearly thrown off by this unexpected development. Zaxtor watched in disbelief as Margaret continued to approach them, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Margaret, what are you?" he began, but she silenced him with a quick glance. The lead assassin, a towering figure even taller than Zaxtor, raised a wicked-looking energy weapon. "Stand aside, old woman," it hissed through its translator. "Our quarrel is not with you." Margaret smiled, but there was steel behind her gentle expression. "Oh, I'm afraid it is. You see, that quarrel of yours is under my protection." And then, to Zaxtor's utter astonishment, the air around Margaret began to shimmer and distort. The assassins took an involuntary step back, their body language radiating confusion and fear. What are you?" the lead assassin demanded, its weapon wavering. Margaret's smile widened, and for a moment, Zaxtor could have sworn her eyes glowed with an inner light. Just a little old lady who's seen too much of the galaxy to stand by and let good people come to harm. With a gesture that seemed almost casual, Margaret thrust her hand forward. An invisible force slammed into the assassins, sending them flying backwards and crashing through the cafe's front window. Alarms blared as the station's atmospheric containment fields snapped into place. Zaxtor sat frozen, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. Margaret turned back to him, the strange glow fading from her eyes. "Well," she said, brushing off her hands, "I'd say our tea time has been rather rudely interrupted. Shall we find somewhere a bit more private to continue our chat?" Still dumbfounded, Zaxtor could only nod. As they hurried out the back exit, alarms echoing through the station's corridors, he found his voice again. "Margaret, what? How did you do that?" The old woman's expression turned serious. "It's a long story, Zaxtor, one I had hoped I'd never have to tell, but it seems the past has a way of catching up with us both." As they navigated the twisting corridors of the station, evading security patrols and curious onlookers, Margaret began to explain. "I'm part of an organization," she said, her voice low. "A group of humans with special abilities. We call ourselves the Guardians." Zaxtor's mind reeled. He'd heard whispers of humans with extraordinary powers, but had always dismissed them as myths or exaggerations. But how? Why? Margaret sighed. "It started generations ago, a result of early human experiments with faster-than-light travel. Something about the energies involved changed us, awakened latent abilities we never knew we had." They ducked into an abandoned maintenance tunnel, the sounds of pursuit growing distant. For years, we worked in secret, Margaret continued, trying to maintain balance in the galaxy to prevent any one species or faction from gaining too much power. But lately, she trailed off, her expression troubled. Zaxtor felt a chill run down his spine. Lately what? He pressed. Margaret met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. Lately, something's been hunting us, picking us off one by one. I thought I'd managed to stay hidden, but... She gestured back toward the cafe. It seems they found me at last. Zaxtor's mind raced. The implications were staggering. If what Margaret said was true, it meant there were forces at work in the galaxy far beyond anything he'd encountered in his years as a soldier and mercenary. Why tell me this? He asked. Why trust me with such a secret? Margaret's expression softened. Because, Zaxtor, in all my years among the stars, you're one of the few beings I've met who truly understands what it means to question one's place in the universe. And because I fear we're going to need each other if we hope to survive what's coming. As if to punctuate her words, the station's emergency sirens began to wail. A mechanical voice echoed through the corridors. Attention all residents and visitors. Outpost Zeta 9 is now under lockdown. Please remain in your current locations and await further instructions. Zaxtor and Margaret exchanged grim looks. They both knew that whoever was after them wouldn't be deterred by a simple lockdown. We need to get off this station, Zaxtor growled. My ship is docked in Bay 17. If we can reach it. Margaret nodded. Lead the way, my friend. I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a very long journey. As they set off through the maintenance tunnels, alarms blaring and the sounds of chaos echoing from the main corridors, Zaxtor couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just irrevocably changed. He'd signed on for many dangerous missions in his time as a mercenary, but nothing could have prepared him for this. Whatever forces were at work, whatever secrets Margaret and her guardians held, one thing was certain. The galaxy would never be the same again. And Zaxtor, the alien mercenary who had once been saved by a kind old woman, now found himself thrust into the center of a conflict that would shape the fate of countless worlds. As they raced toward an uncertain future, Zaxtor made a silent vow. He would protect Margaret, unravel the mystery of the Guardians, and perhaps, in doing so, find the purpose he'd been searching for all these years. The hunt was on, and the stakes couldn't be higher. On the run, the docking bay was a hive of chaos when Zaxtor and Margaret arrived. Alarms blared incessantly, and panicked travelers of various species scrambled to reach their ships. Security drones buzzed overhead, their monotonous warnings adding to the cacophony. There, Zaxtor growled, pointing toward a battered freighter nestled between two sleeker vessels. The Starfire. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Interesting name for such a well-loved ship. Despite the tension, Zaxtor felt the corners of his mouth twitch upward. She may not look like much, but she's gotten me out of more tight spots than I can count. As they approached the ship, a high-pitched whine cut through the air. Zaxtor's combat instincts kicked in immediately. He grabbed Margaret and dove behind a stack of cargo containers just as a bolt of energy scorched the deck where they had been standing. "Seems our friends have caught up," Margaret said, her voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. Zaxtor risked a glance around the containers. 3 figures in shimmering camouflage were advancing on their position, energy weapons primed. Behind them, he caught glimpses of station security forces, their shouts lost in the general chaos. "We're pinned down," Zaxtor growled. "I can't get to the ship's access panel from here." Margaret's eyes narrowed in concentration. "How good is your aim, Zaxtor?" The Kregarian blinked in confusion. "I'd very good, but I don't see how." Before he could finish, Margaret closed her eyes. The air around them began to shimmer, just as it had in the cafe. Suddenly, the cargo containers they were hiding behind lifted off the ground, rotating slowly in midair. "What are you?" Zaxtor began, but Margaret cut him off. "When I give the word, start shooting. Don't stop until we reach the ship." Zaxtor nodded, drawing his blaster. He'd seen a lot in his years as a mercenary, but nothing quite like this. As the containers continued to rotate, he caught glimpses of their attackers, who seemed just as bewildered by the display. "Now," Margaret shouted. The containers shot forward like missiles, slamming into the advancing assassins. At the same time, Zaxtor leaped up, his blaster spitting energy bolts with deadly accuracy. 2 of the assassins went down immediately, their camouflage flickering out. Margaret was already running toward the Starfire, her hands outstretched. Objects around the docking bay, tools, smaller cargo boxes, even a hapless cleaning droid, rose into the air and began orbiting her like a bizarre shield. Zaxtor sprinted after her, laying down covering fire. He reached the ship's access panel and slammed his hand against the biometric scanner. The airlock hissed open. "Get in," he roared, continuing to fire at their pursuers. Margaret darted inside, and Zaxtor followed close behind. As the airlock sealed shut, the sounds of chaos from the docking bay became muffled. Zaxtor wasted no time, charging toward the cockpit with Margaret close behind. "Strap in," he ordered, dropping into the pilot's seat. His fingers flew over the controls, bypassing safety protocols and bringing the engines online. Through the view screen, they could see station security forces converging on the ship. Energy bolts splashed harmlessly against the Starfire's shields. "Hang on," Zaxtor growled. "This might get rough." The ship lurched as he fired the main thrusters. They shot out of the docking bay, clipping another vessel and sending it spinning. Alarms blared as they cleared the station's protective field, radiation warnings flashing across the console. "We've got company," Margaret said, her eyes fixed on the sensor readouts. 3 ships in pursuit. Looks like station security. Zaxtor's 4 eyes narrowed in concentration. Not for long. He pushed the Starfire into a series of wild maneuvers, weaving between chunks of space debris and the skeletal remains of abandoned ships. The pursuing vessels struggled to keep up, clearly piloted by security officers unused to such reckless flying. As they cleared the debris field, Zaxtor's fingers danced across the nav computer. "Hold tight. We're jumping to hyperspace." The stars elongated around them, and with a lurch that seemed to bend reality itself, they vanished into the swirling vortex of hyperspace. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The gentle hum of the ship's systems seemed impossibly loud after the chaos they'd just escaped. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. "Well," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "That was certainly exciting." Zaxtor turned to look at her, still struggling to reconcile the image of the fragile old woman with the power she'd displayed. You have some explaining to do." Margaret nodded, her expression turning serious. "I suppose I do. Where shall I begin?" Over the next few hours, as the Starfire hurtled through hyperspace toward an uncertain destination, Margaret told her story. She spoke of the early days of human faster-than-light travel, of the strange energies they encountered and the changes they wrought on a select few. She told of the formation of the Guardians, their mission to maintain balance in the galaxy, and the terrible burden of their power. "We can manipulate the very fabric of reality," she explained, her eyes distant. "Move objects, influence minds, even alter the flow of time to a limited degree. But such power comes at a great cost." Zaxtor listened in rapt attention, his worldview expanding with every word. "And now someone is hunting you. Why?" Margaret sighed, suddenly looking every bit her age. "That's the question, isn't it? We've always had enemies. Those who feared our power or sought to control it. But this is different. Whoever is behind this knows things about us that no outsider should. They're not just hunting us, they're unraveling the very foundations of what we are." A warning chime from the nav computer interrupted them. Zaxtor checked the readouts, his expression grim. "We're approaching the edge of known space. If we continue on this course, We'll be entering uncharted territory. Margaret nodded. Good. The further we get from civilized space, the harder it will be for them to track us. Zaxtor hesitated. Margaret, I'm a mercenary. I'm used to dangerous jobs, but I'm not sure I'm equipped for a fight like this. The old woman reached out, placing a hand on his armored forearm. Zaxtor, when I saved you all those years ago, I saw something in you, a capacity for growth, for change. You're more than just a soldier or a hired gun. You have a chance to be part of something greater than yourself. Zaxtor met her gaze, seeing the weight of centuries in her eyes. He thought of all the battles he'd fought, all the credits he'd earned, and the emptiness that had driven him to that backwater station where their paths had crossed again. What would you have me do? He asked. Margaret smiled, a glimmer of hope in her expression. Help me find the others. There are more guardians out there, in hiding or on the run. If we can gather them, maybe we can uncover who's behind this and put a stop to it before it's too late. Zaxtor nodded slowly. It won't be easy. Whoever is after you has resources, connections, will be hunted across the galaxy. I know, Margaret said softly. But I believe we have a chance. Together. As the Starfire plunged deeper into unknown space, Zaxtor felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. Whatever trials lay ahead, whatever enemies they would face, he knew that this was where he was meant to be. The alien mercenary and the human guardian, an unlikely pair united by fate and a shared desire to protect the galaxy. Their journey was just beginning, and the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see what would unfold. Little did they know that far behind them, in the depths of civilized space, dark forces were already mobilizing. The hunt was on, and the fate of not just the Guardians, but the entire galaxy hung in the balance. The truth unveiled. Days blended into weeks as the Starfire pushed deeper into uncharted space. Zaxtor and Margaret fell into an uneasy routine, alternating between long stretches of silence and intense discussions about the nature of the Guardians and the threat they faced. As they approached a distant, unmapped system, the ship's sensors picked up an anomaly. There, Margaret said, pointing to a blip on the screen. That energy signature. It's familiar. Zaxtor frowned, studying the readouts. It doesn't match any known stellar phenomena. What is it? Margaret's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. It's a Guardian outpost, one of our hidden sanctuaries. They approached cautiously, half expecting an ambush. Instead, they found a small, unremarkable planetoid orbiting a dying star. As they drew closer, the planetoid's surface seemed to shimmer and shift, revealing a hidden base seamlessly integrated into the rocky terrain. Impressive cloaking technology, Zaxtor muttered as he guided the ship toward a concealed landing pad. As they disembarked, Margaret's expression grew troubled. Something's wrong. There should be others here, but I don't sense any presence. They made their way through eerily empty corridors, the base's systems humming to life around them, as if awakening from a long slumber. Finally, they reached what appeared to be a central control room. Margaret approached a console, her hands hovering over the controls. This is it. If there are answers to be found, they'll be here. As she began to interface with the system, the room suddenly came alive. Holographic displays flickered to life, filling the air with streams of data and images. Zaxtor watched in awe as the history of the Guardians unfolded before him. He saw the early days of human space exploration, the discovery of the energy that had changed them, and the formation of the Guardians. But as the images progressed, something changed. The Guardians' noble mission began to warp, their actions becoming more ruthless, more controlling. No, Margaret whispered, her voice filled with horror. This can't be right. Zaxtor turned to her, confusion etched on his features. What is it? What are you seeing? Margaret's hands trembled as she manipulated the controls. The Guardians, we didn't just maintain balance. We shaped it. Entire civilizations rose and fell at our whim. We played gods, Zaxtor, and we were cruel ones. The images shifted, showing conflicts across the galaxy. In each one, shadowy figures moved behind the scenes, their actions subtly altering the course of events. With a sickening realization, Zaxtor recognized some of the battles he had fought in, wars he had believed were just or necessary. All of it, he growled. All of it was manipulated. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. Not all Guardians knew the full extent of it. Many, like me, believed we were simply maintaining balance. But the leadership, they became corrupted by the power. Suddenly, a new image appeared. A familiar face, albeit much younger, filled the display. Margaret gasped. That's me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The younger Margaret spoke, her voice filled with righteous anger. "This has to stop. We've gone too far. I'm leaving, and I'm going to find a way to undo what we've done." As the recording ended, the present-day Margaret slumped in her chair, looking utterly defeated. "I forgot," she murmured. "How could I forget?" Zaxtor's mind raced, trying to process everything he had learned. The ones hunting you. Could they be other Guardians? Ones who don't want the truth to come out? Margaret nodded slowly. It's possible, or perhaps something even worse. If our actions affected the very fabric of reality, who knows what consequences we might have unleashed? Before Zaxtor could respond, an alarm blared through the base. On one of the screens, a ship appeared, approaching rapidly. "We've been found," Zaxtor growled, drawing his weapon. Margaret stood, her expression hardening. No more running, no more hiding. It's time to face what we've done and make it right. As they prepared to confront their pursuers, Zaxtor felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at the manipulation he had unknowingly been a part of, respect for Margaret's determination to set things right, and a growing resolve to see this through to the end, whatever the cost. The truth had been unveiled, and it was more terrible than either of them could have imagined. But in that moment, as alarms blared and danger approached, Zaxtor knew that he was exactly where he needed to be. Together, the alien mercenary and the reformed Guardian would face the consequences of actions set in motion long ago. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the final confrontation was about to begin. Final stand. The approaching ship docked with a thunderous clang that echoed through the abandoned base. Zaxtor and Margaret stood side by side in the control room, ready to face whatever came through those doors. "Any regrets?" Margaret asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Zaxtor's 4 eyes blinked in rapid succession, a Kragarian expression of determination. "None. Whatever happens, we face it together." The doors hissed open, and 3 figures strode in. 2 were clearly Guardians, their eyes glowing with barely contained power. But it was the 3rd figure that made Margaret gasp. "Aldrich," she whispered. The man stepped forward, his ageless face a mask of cold fury. "Hello, Margaret. It's been a long time." Zaxtor tensed, ready for a fight, but Margaret placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Aldrich is the leader of the Guardians," she explained. Aldrich's gaze swept over the activated consoles, taking in the displayed information. "I see you've uncovered our little secret. How inconvenient." "Inconvenient." Margaret's voice rose in anger. "We played with the lives of entire civilizations. We became the very thing we were supposed to prevent." Aldrich sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "We maintained order, Margaret. Yes, there were sacrifices, but the galaxy would have torn itself apart without our guidance." Zaxtor growled, his patience wearing thin. "Guidance? You manipulated us all. How many died in your manufactured wars?" For the first time, Aldrich seemed to truly notice the Kragarian. Yes. The alien. I must admit, I'm curious how you fit into all this, but it hardly matters now." He turned back to Margaret. "Come back with us, old friend." Help us fix the damage your little rebellion has caused." Margaret stood straighter, her eyes beginning to glow. "No, Aldrich. This ends now. We were wrong. All of us. It's time to let the galaxy chart its own course." Aldrich's expression hardened. "I had hoped you'd see reason, but I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You always were stubborn." He nodded to his companions. "Take them." What followed was a battle unlike anything Zaxtor had ever experienced. The Guardians unleashed their full power, reality itself seeming to warp and bend around them. Objects flew through the air, energy crackled and exploded, and time itself seemed to stutter and skip. Zaxtor fought with every ounce of skill and strength he possessed. His blaster fire was deflected, but his physical prowess kept him in the fight. He managed to take down one of the Guardians with a well-placed blow, but the other proved more formidable. Margaret and Aldrich were locked in a titanic struggle, their powers clashing in a dazzling display of light and energy. The very foundations of the base shook with the force of their conflict. As the battle raged, Zaxtor found himself backed into a corner, the remaining Guardian advancing on him with deadly intent. Just as he thought it might be the end, he heard Margaret's voice in his mind. "Zaxtor, the console. Destroy it." Without hesitation, he aimed his blaster at the central computer and fired. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the room, momentarily disrupting the Guardian's concentration. In that split second of distraction, Margaret made her move. With a cry that seemed to shake the very stars, she unleashed a wave of energy that engulfed Aldrich and his remaining companion. When the light faded, Aldrich and the other Guardian lay unconscious on the floor. Margaret stood over them, her eyes still glowing with power. "It's over," she said softly. Zaxtor approached cautiously. "What now?" Margaret turned to him, her expression a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Now we make it right. We expose the truth, dismantle the Guardians' network, and let the galaxy heal from our interference." As they prepared to leave, securing their prisoners and gathering what data they could, Zaxtor felt a strange sense of peace. He had started this journey as a lost soul, a mercenary without purpose. Now he stood on the precipice of a new chapter, not just for himself, but for the entire galaxy. "It won't be easy," he said as they boarded the Starfire. "There will be chaos when the truth comes out. Wars might erupt. Civilizations might crumble." Margaret nodded, her eyes on the stars visible through the viewscreen. "Yes, but they will be their own wars, their own choices. We give them back their free will, for better or worse." As the ship lifted off, leaving the hidden base behind, Zaxtor realized that his life had come full circle. Once again, he had been saved by Margaret, not just physically this time, but spiritually as well. He had found his purpose, his place in the universe. Together, the unlikely pair, an alien mercenary and a reformed Guardian, set off into the unknown. They carried with them the truth that would reshape the galaxy and the determination to see it through, no matter the cost. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter as the Starfire disappeared into the depths of space, carrying with it the promise of a new dawn for all sentient beings. The age of shadowy manipulation was over. The age of true free will was about to begin. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the cosmos, the universe itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The balance had been restored, not by the heavy hand of would-be gods, but by the courage of those willing to face the truth and fight for what was right. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for Zaxtor and Margaret, it was just the beginning. Their story, like the galaxy itself, was far from over.